Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition. Stage 1 boost back startup.
Wow, beautiful views from the first stage and second stage camera. You can see the first stage leaving in that view. And as you saw and heard, those events just happened. Main engine cutoff, stage separation, second engine startup 1, and the first stage boost back burn. You can see beautiful views of that first stage boost back burn right now. That boost back burn will continue for about 30 more seconds. Again, this is the burn where the engines will bring the trajectory back towards our landing site at Cape Canaveral, back to landing zone 1, which is just a short hop from where we lifted off just a few minutes ago. And we have just under 10 seconds of that boost back burn of the first stage.
Stage 1 boost back shutdown.
There is the shutdown of that first stage boost back burn. You can see the second stage is still in the middle of its burn. And in about 3 minutes, there will be 2 additional burns on our first stage to prepare for its landing at landing zone 1 at Cape Canaveral. We are just under T plus 4 minutes
Both
into
vehicles are on a nominal trajectory.
Into today's mission. You just heard the call out that both first and second stage are on a nominal trajectory. CRS-32 is SpaceX's 45th launch this year. We are coming up on entry burn of the first stage and then second engine cutoff of the second stage. Around the T plus 6.5 minute mark, you should see on your screen the first stage's entry burn. For that entry burn, we relight 3 of the 9 M1D engines on the first stage, starting with the center E9 engine, followed shortly after by the E1 and E5 engines. And this burn will slow the vehicle down as it passes back into the Earth's atmosphere. We need to slow down to reduce re-entry forces, which help us to recover and reuse the first stage. You can follow along on the screen to the bottom left and right of your screen. You can see the stage 1 telemetry on the bottom left and the stage 2 telemetry on the bottom right. And again,
both vehicles continue to follow a nominal trajectory.
Both first and second stages continue to be on a good trajectory. And on your screen is the second stage MVAC engine glowing in the middle of its burn, carrying our CRS-32 mission with the Dragon and trunk on top of the second stage right now. We are under a minute to the start of that first stage entry burn. Again, this will be a 3-engine burn of our first stage as it slows itself down, making its way back to landing zone 1. And that burn will be a 3-engine burn with the center E9 engine along with 2 engines on the side. Meanwhile, second stage continues to be looking good with that single Merlin vacuum engine carrying the Dragon capsule.
Both vehicles continue to follow a nominal trajectory
towards the orbit. Just a few seconds away from the start of that first stage entry burn.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
There is that start of the first stage entry burn.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And there,
Stage 1 FTS has saved.
There is the shutdown of the entry burn and the call out that the flight termination system has saved. Now, this first stage that's supporting today's mission has just performed its entry burn for the 3rd time. Falcon 9 is the world's first orbital class reusable rocket, and this is important because reusability allows SpaceX
both vehicles following a nominal trajectory
to refly the most expensive parts of the rocket, which in turn drives down the cost of access to space. Now, coming up, we'll have the landing burn on the first stage,
Stage 1 transonic.
Quickly by the shutdown of our MVAC engine on the second stage. You can see the lights of the Florida coast in that view on your left.
Stage 1 landing burn.
There is the start of our stage 1 landing burn. We're now waiting for Falcon 9 to make that precision landing.
Deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
What a beautiful view of that stage 1 landing. And there you have it. That landing marks SpaceX's 434th recovery of an orbital class rocket, including first stage landings for Falcon 9 and Heavy. We are now looking at stage 2.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance,
which is carrying our CRS-32 mission, and it is in the middle of its burn with the second engine cut off in just a few moments here.
Stage 2 FTS has saved.
And you heard the call out that flight termination system is saved, getting ready for shutdown.
nominal park orbit insertion.
There we got confirmation. We did have second engine cutoff, and we did have confirmation of a good orbit. It looks like we are on track for Dragon separation in just under 30 seconds here. The vehicle is now coasting with Dragon attached, and we are just moments away from spacecraft separation. We're seeing a great view from the second stage as it cools down and prepares to separate Dragon so that it may begin its journey to the International Space Station. Looks like we may be seeing the sun rising and shining on that MVAC.
Dragon separation confirmed.
There is that confirmation of Dragon separation. We've had a great mission so far with an on-time liftoff at 4:15 a.m. Eastern Time, a successful stage separation followed by a successful landing of our first stage at Landing Zone 1 and a good orbital insertion. We are now just waiting for nose cone deployment, which should happen in just a few moments here. So I'll hand it back over to you, Joseph, at JSC.
Thank you very much, Yome, and great to see the NASA SpaceX 32nd commercial resupply mission light up the morning sky off the Florida coastline. And always great to work with you as we again await the nose cone deploy, and as we await those moments where the nose cone will expose those 4 forward bulkhead Dracos, these Draco thrusters will execute a series of maneuvers necessary to raise its orbit and meet up with the International Space Station. So as we continue to monitor that nose cone deploy, right now, immediately after Dragon separates from the Falcon 9, it begins what we call the activation and rendezvous phase of the mission. Now this is during the phase that Dragon is configured for on-orbit operations and will begin after the separation of Dragon from the Falcon 9, which you just saw, and it'll end with the completion of the final co-elliptic burn that'll occur as Dragon begins its methodical approach to the International Space Station. Our initial orbit today, 190 kilometers by 210 kilometers, with those numbers representing the perigee and apogee of the orbit, the lowest and highest points of the Earth. That means the orbit isn't a perfect circle, but more like a very slight ellipse. And over the next several hours after liftoff, Dragon will execute a series of burns, which will gradually raise its orbit to align more closely with the station. And there are 5 major burns or firings of those Draco thrusters we were talking about on Dragon that will bring the spacecraft close to station before we begin the final approach maneuvers. And we'll continue to monitor that nose cone deploy as it looks like it'll get underway here shortly. Let's take a look inside and transfer to the control rooms. On the left side, you can see the SpaceX mission control teams over in Hawthorne, California, and that oversaw today's launch and will continue to monitor Dragon on its journey to the International Space Station over the next day. The team you see on the right are here with me in mission control in Houston, and the International Space Station flight control team is monitoring the orbiting complex, and over the course of the operations jointly with Hawthorne, the flight controller is there. Those joint operations between the two teams, you will see, will come a little closer to when Dragon is in its final approach phase, and that'll be about 2 hours or so prior to docking. The teams here are awaiting for that nose cone to deploy, and we'll also bring you those live views from inside Dragon, where you'll be able to see it open up and begin its journey onto the International Space Station ahead of docking. Well, speaking of docking, that is slated for tomorrow, Tuesday, April 22nd, with the anticipated time of 8:20 a.m. Eastern Time at 7:20 a.m. Central, and we'll have all the coverage starting here on NASA Plus, starting at 7:45 a.m. Eastern, 5:45 a.m. Central. Thank you for following along as we continue to await the nose cone deploy of NASA's SpaceX 32nd Commercial Resupply Services mission, as it is well on its way to the International Space Station after that on-time liftoff of 4:15 a.m. Eastern Time, carrying over 3 tons of science and supplies to the Expedition 73 crew. And that includes NASA astronauts Anne McClain, who you can see in the front right-hand side, along with Nicole Ayers on the front left, Johnny Kim, who is on that back left-hand side, just over in the background, JAXA astronaut and Expedition Commander, newly minted Commander of Expedition 73, Takuya Onishi, and Roscosmos cosmonauts Kirill Peskov, Sergei Ryzhikov, and Alexei Zubritsky joining up for Expedition 73. And going into the docking phases, and again, anticipated for tomorrow morning, Kim and Onishi will be the ones that will be monitoring the Dragon spacecraft as it approaches the International Space Station. And they just arrived on station pretty recently. For Johnny Kim, just arrived on station nearly 2 weeks ago, back on April 8th. And for Takuya Onishi on the right-hand side, he was just ahead of him with Crew 10 as he would arrive to the orbiting laboratory back on March 16th. And we mentioned that Onishi, the newly minted Commander of Expedition 73, and that was just a couple of days ago on April 18th, and what has been a pretty busy weekend for overall spaceflight involving the International Space Station. And as docking begins, and once the spacecraft docks to the orbiting laboratory, it'll be Kim and team that'll begin to unpack the 3+ tons of cargo and supplies as they begin to re-up and refuel the International Space Station. As we continue to monitor here and await the nose cone deploy of the NASA SpaceX 32 or CRS-32 Commercial Resupply Services mission, we mentioned some of the key science aboard that spacecraft, and that was earlier in the broadcast, and you can find out more at nasa.gov. But another key piece of science is the APEX 12 experiment, the Advanced Plant Experiments in Space 12, that will investigate whether certain cell components can help plants survive stressful environments in space and influence the viability of future space crops. And we just got reports that the nose cone is beginning to deploy, so we'll keep an eye on for those first images inside Dragon. And there you can see the full breakdown of cargo that is heading to the International Space Station, including crew supplies, science investigations, spacewalking and equipment, and much more. And aboard Dragon also is a carefully curated menu of food to support those aboard the station, including a diverse selection of tailored choices to reflect the crew's individual preferences. And each item is thoughtfully engineered to help maintain the crew's health, performance, and morale throughout the mission. And we continue to follow along inside the International Space Station Flight Control Room as we await the nose cone deploy of the 32nd Commercial Resupply Services mission. We mentioned earlier that Dragon will perform 5 key burns using its Draco thrusters to steadily close in on the International Space Station before beginning its final approach. Well, that first burn, the first major burn, is the phase burn, which happens at the highest point or apogee of Dragon's very first orbit as it's well on its way. It raises the lowest port or the orbit or the perigee, helping Dragon get closer to the space station's path. Burn number 2 is the boost burn, which is based on what our orbital data will tell us. The raise Dragon's orbit until it reaches an altitude just 10 kilometers lower than the space station. And then the third burn is the close co-elliptic burn, which adjusts Dragon's orbit so it stays about 10 kilometers below the station the whole way around the Earth. The fourth burn, the transfer burn maneuver, which raises Dragon's highest orbital point to just 2.5 kilometers below the station. And then we mentioned earlier the final co-elliptic burn that'll keep Dragon in a stable orbit 2.5 kilometers beneath the station as it lines up for approach. As we continue to follow along and await the nose cone deploy, starting to close in on that nose cone, opening up and exposing those bulkhead Draco thrusters. That'll help begin those burns. That'll begin about 45 minutes or so, that phase burn, that first one we mentioned, just shortly after that great on-time launch here earlier this morning. And after that, the Dragon spacecraft will reach different waypoints or checkpoints along its way as it'll begin approach initiation, and then waypoint 0, waypoint 1, and 2 before eventually docking with the International Space Station. That is slated again for tomorrow morning, Tuesday, April 22nd at 8:20 a.m. Eastern Time, 7:20 a.m. Central Time, and we'll have the NASA Plus start time at 7:45 a.m. Eastern, 5:45 a.m. Central. And we are closing in slowly but surely on that nose cone to be deployed as the team's on the ground in SpaceX on the left-hand side. You can see in Hawthorne, California, as well as the team here inside of the International Space Station Flight Control Room and Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, currently monitoring Dragon's progress. And they will be doing so over the next several hours, a little more than a day, between the time of launch to the time of the anticipated docking. And we just got confirmation that the nose cone deploy has been completed. And again, that exposes those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters as Dragon now continues its journey. And there's a great view coming from the Dragon spacecraft right there, the first looks of Earth as it makes its way and fades up and towards the top of your screen. And again, Dragon carrying those 6,700 and such pounds of cargo and supplies, beginning its journey to the International Space Station. Well, now that the nose cone is deployed and Dragon is ready for its phasing burns to the space station with a successful orbit insertion, I'm now joined by Dana Weigel, the International Space Station Program Manager. Dana, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me today. Excellent and beautiful launch we had.
It's wonderful to see it light up the Florida coast like it does. And of course, well on the way to the International Space Station that you oversee, we've discussed the crucial role of collaboration and teamwork in making missions like this possible. How have you witnessed this in your team's preparation for this launch this morning?
Well, we have hundreds of researchers worldwide and a large industry supply base across the country who support our missions. Putting together a mission is a big technical and logistics challenge, from equipment manufacturing and deliveries to packing and integrating the cargo and planning and executing the mission. An additional challenge for this mission was the late manifest changes that we had to make to adjust to the loss of the NG-22 Cygnus mission that was originally planned to fly this summer. It's hard to describe the complexity of how we keep our space station well supplied with the proper reserve margins. It's one of the hallmarks of how we successfully have maintained the continuous presence in low Earth orbit on the International Space Station for the last quarter of a century. We're fortunate to have an extremely dedicated and adaptable team across NASA and industry who come together to make our missions look seamless.
And it's been a wonder to watch you and the team work too. And I mentioned earlier, it's been a pretty busy weekend, just this weekend alone, in spaceflight involving the International Space Station. We saw NASA astronaut Johnny Kim recently arrived to space station. Spacewalk preparations are underway, scheduled for May 1st. Change in command, a new expedition beginning with Expedition 73, and veteran astronaut Don Pettit landing yesterday and returning home to Houston earlier this evening. How has your team's preparation and everything that you just mentioned reflected that spirit of adaptability and coordination across what's been a pretty busy time frame?
Well, the pace of our current activity is nothing new to the International Space Station team. The impressive thing that's always so striking to me is how NASA and our international and commercial partners work so closely together to make it look easy. Trust me, none of it is easy, nor is any facet of human spaceflight.
We mentioned earlier, and you just touched upon it a moment ago, the excitement building towards the station's 25th anniversary of human presence that'll be coming up this November. A lot of key milestones along the path that have happened. How do missions like the commercial service or resupply services mission, this 32nd one, continue to showcase the station's capabilities and its role in advancing science, technology, and exploration?
As we have now for decades, science is the hallmark and trademark of the International Space Station. The arrival of Dragon tomorrow with its supplies and research not only advances science and technology, but also enables us to continue fulfilling our objectives on this most amazing complex.
Dana Weigel, the International Space Station Program Manager, thank you so much for your time in joining today's broadcast.
Thank you again for having me.
Let's check back in with Yome and the team at SpaceX.
Thanks, Joseph. Dragon will now begin its journey toward the International Space Station, executing a series of phasing burns to gradually close the distance. This approach will take just over a day, with docking targeted for early tomorrow morning, Tuesday, April 22nd. NASA and SpaceX continue working side by side to deliver science, supplies, and inspiration to the orbiting laboratory. Congratulations again to the teams on another successful cargo resupply services launch. SpaceX is honored to be a part of NASA's Commercial Resupply Services initiative to deliver critical cargo to the space station, and we thank NASA for entrusting us with today's mission. It's only April, and we've already launched in partnership with NASA missions like Crew 10, SphereX, and Punch, Firefly Aerospace, and Intuitive Machines. For those of you following along, you'll know that this mission marks our 45th of the year, and to stay up to date with all of our launches and missions, check spacex.com/launches for schedules. That will do it for us here at SpaceX in Hawthorne. Good night, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Hand it back to you, Joseph.
Thanks, Yome. As always, it's been a pleasure to team up with you and share this launch with you. Join us on NASA Plus for our coverage of the final approach and docking of this spacecraft beginning at 5:45 a.m. Central Time, 6:45 a.m. Eastern. Tomorrow, Tuesday, for that docking expected near 7:20 a.m. Central, 8:20 a.m. Eastern. Be sure to visit nasa.gov for the latest updates on our coverage and expected docking time as we follow the operations throughout the next few hours. With Dragon safely on its way to the International Space Station, that wraps up this morning's coverage of NASA and SpaceX's 32nd Commercial Resupply Services launch. Until next time, this is Mission Control Houston.